I'm Eric, and this is Yeti Garage. Today, I'm going to be working on the 61 Bel Air. I'm cloning this into a 62. I'm going to put an LS and a 6-speed in it. First step is to get rid of this old front suspension. Put something more modern, disc brakes, power steering, a little bit better suspension geometry. This is the front suspension I'm going to use. This is off of a 1984 Cutlass. This has power steering and disc brakes. First step is to get everything I'm not going to use off of this clip. Got all these lines out of my way. Ready to start taking some measurements, making some cuts, coming up with a plan how I can fit this onto the factory frame. I removed the shocks and the springs so that I could set this at close to ride height. Right now it's sitting on some blocks of wood and a jack stand, and this frame rail in front of the front suspension is level. I wanted that level and the suspension at ride height so that I could transfer the center line of the wheel or the hub onto the frame rail. I used some squares and a level and a straight edge and made this mark. Here is the center line of the wheel, and I center punched a mark so that on the new frame or the old frame I have a spot to measure from to make sure I'm square. Now I've picked a spot, or this is the only good spot on this frame, to cut it. So you can see this frame rail is running pretty straight front to rear of the car, and then it begins to turn towards the outside of the vehicle. So I want to cut it in front of this turn so I have a straight piece to work with. But I can't go very far forward because I have this bracket that's welded to the frame that's holding the A-arm. So there's only one good spot to cut this. So I marked that, a bunch of measuring, tried to mark the same spot on the other side. It's a stamped frame rail, so it's not identical side to side. Doing the best I can. Now I'm going to cut that, and then I come around here to the front, and there's these braces that go from the cross member to the frame rail, and they're bolted on. But I believe this end, the front end, is going to be sticking out past or really close to where the Bel Air's frame ends and the bumper will be mounted. So I'm going to remove those. Maybe I'll shorten them. Maybe I'll build new ones. But for right now, they got to get out of the way. And I'm going to cut the front of this frame as close to this steering box as I can get it. And I'm just going to cut it straight through that rail and straight through this rail. So here's the Cutlass frame cut down. Hopefully this is enough to get it to fit into the Bel Air frame. This is the Bel Air frame. I took the springs and the shocks out of this frame as well and cycled the suspension up to roughly ride height. Then I used a straight edge and squares and figured out where the center line of the wheel is in relation to the frame, and that's this mark here. And then I measured back, found this hole, this factory hole in the frame, and that happens to be 14 inches from the mark. So when I put the new cutlass cross member on there, I have something to measure to. I'll measure from this hole, and this has a hole on the other side also in the same spot, right here, to the punch mark I made on the cutlass cross member will be 14 inches. The factory, this is an X frame, this is a 62 or 61. So it's like an Impala or Biscayne or Bel Air, these X frames. Yeah, this front cross member is a stamped piece and it's lapped over the frame rail, which is a stamped, two stamped pieces that's welded together. So I'm going to cut it at this seam, this weld. The cutlass measures from the center line of the wheel to the rear cut where I have it cut now is about 12 inches, which means somewhere in here is where the weld will be to weld the new piece on. The Bel Air frame measures about 5 inches right here, the height of the frame. The cutlass frame is about 4 inches. So I'm going to line the tops, and I'm going to notch this bottom frame, pinch that together to get it to about 4 inches. The other thing I'll have to do is use these frame horns. The tips of the Bel Air frame need to be welded on to the cutlass frame, so I have a core support and the mounting point for the core support, and this is the mounting point for the bumper brackets. And I also, the car is on jack stands now and it's level, and then I measured between my reference hole back here to the ground and the core support mount hole to the ground, and the core support mounting point is a 1/4 inch lower than the frame is at this point, so that when I have the new cutlass frame on here, I have a place to measure to see that I'm at the right angle, so the joint right here doesn't end up cocked, making the front end where the core support mounts too high or too low, making it hard to align the sheet metal. Also, while that's all tacked together, I'll put my core support and fenders on here and make sure I have the driver's door spaced pretty good right now, shimmed pretty well. So I should be able to see if it's off a large amount, I'll be able to see it. The other number I got before I started cutting anything was from this hole in the frame, the reference hole, to the center of that hole, to the center of the hole for the core support. That measurement is 34 1/8 of an inch, so that when I put the frame horns onto the cutlass frame, I know that I'm the right length. And then I have the 1/4 inch for the right height. That should get me pretty close. And then I'll square it, measure diagonally across to make sure I'm not racked. I think it's time to cut. I cut the frame. This is the 1961 suspension. This is what we're getting rid of. And then I see that. I pie cut the bottom of the frame rail. I think I mentioned this is about 5 inches. I took an inch out here. I'll bend this up so it ends up at 4 inches. Which is what this frame measures, is 4 inches right here. This frame, I pie cut 1.25 inches out because this frame is wider than that frame, and I'll bend this in so the two frame rails both end up, I think the exact numbers are 2.5 and 4 1/8. I hammered the pie cut closed and welded it, ground it, sanded it down. I didn't take into account that this on a diagonal is a longer distance than on a straight, so now I have to make a patch about a 1/2 inch short. I think we'll be all right. I was going to fish plate on this outside of the frame anyway. I did the same on the frame rails on the car. I hammered that pie cut closed, welded it, ground it down, sanded it off. I have this angle, I think, at the right spot to match up with that clip. We're about ready to weld these two pieces together. See if I made any mistakes so far. That didn't go too bad. I welded these, tacked these small pieces of angle onto the top of the cutlass frame so that it would rest on top of the Bel Air frame, and I wouldn't have to try to hold it on with 1,000,000 clamps. And then I just used a floor jack, jacked it up, slid it in, got some tacks on it. I got a digital level. Right now it's sitting at 0.1, which is what the car is sitting at, so it's level. And then it's 0.1 side to side, which I think it started at 0.2 side to side. I can't get it perfectly level, so I'm just on regular jack stands here. But the fit is weldable. If you can see that. The big hole, that frame where I ripped a brace out of the inside, I'll have to patch up. The outside of the frame, where I pie cut that, that's where I ended up with that. It'll focus. That 1/2 inch gap that I'm going to have to fill in. And then I'll just have a plate over, well, weld this, put the patches in as I need, grind it down, sand it, and then fish plate over. So I welded, there we go. 2 frames are welded together. I had to put that little 1/2 inch patch in here. And then I ground it down to only maybe 5% of the welds left, the reinforcement of the weld. But I don't want to go past flush because I don't want to start removing material from the frame. Got the top all welded. I get a lot of glare here. But Inside's welded, and I filled in that hole. And I just kind of measured and came up with a shape for a fish plate. Made it out of paper. Figured that'd fit. Then I transferred it to steel, cut it out with the plas. This is 1/4 inch plate. I would have preferred 3/16, but I don't have any, and I kind of live out in the sticks, and I didn't feel like going to town. So I'll round, you can see I marked, I'm going to round these corners so I don't have any sharp edges like propagate a crack. And then I'm going to have to bend this plate. It has a gap, the frame's curved here. And then weld that on. And I'll probably make something similar for the top of the frame, and I'll just do the outside and the top. I think will be good enough. So I welded the fish plate on after I heated it up, bent it so it followed the, you see that frame has a radius now. And then I built a little plate for the top, welded them all out, to the other side, and then the front, just made a little pattern and capped the tip of the frame rail, the piece of plate, grounded it and sanded it all down. And then I'm just going to hook the original 61 frame horns onto this. That's the next, I think, last step is to get those frame horns on the tip of this frame. I cut the frame horns off the 61 frame and just tacked them on those plates. And I set the core support on there, just have it on with some vice grips, and bolted the fender on, real rough. I didn't use any shims or anything. I don't know if this will show up on the camera, but it's definitely, the gap is wider at the bottom of that door than at the top. But if you stand, I tried to measure it with an angle finder and I really couldn't. This body line isn't that sharp to really get a good reading on it. But if you stand, I don't know if this will show up on the camera either, but if I come back here and I look up, I can definitely see that tip of that fender, the front by the headlight of that fender, is higher than it needs to be, or where it should be, making that body line look really, really goofy. So I'm off. I'm glad I tacked it. And I came in here and measured again from that reference mark I had to the ground, and from the frame horn to the ground. And I don't know where I got messed up when I laid it out and when I tacked it, but sure enough, when I looked at the pad I wrote those numbers down on, it's a 1/4 inch high at the core support. So I'm going to take the core support out, cut those tacks, lower it 1/4 inch, check again, and then weld those out, and this project will be done. Pulled the core support off, cut the tacks, lowered the frame horns 1/4 inch, tacked it, put the core support back on, checked it, was a lot happier with how that fit. I welded them out. If you can see, it's welded out. I'm not in love with how it looks, but it's strong, it's functional. It'll be hidden by the bumper, the inner fender, and the radiator. So it'll be fine. Well, that's it for this project. Tomorrow, start something else. Thanks for watching.